right, this is Hyperborean Radio coming at you out of the wasteland. Take number, I think we're on 4, 3, 2, I don't know. One of them.
We're on take something or other.
Yes, we've already done this a couple times, and yeah, hopefully we'll get it right this time.
Yes.
So I'm Celtic God. With me is the Lore Keeper.
Hello, all you dirty heathens out there. Welcome to the show.
Yes, this is the show where approximately, on average, for over the last few weeks, only 53% of the people are tough enough for Hyperborean Radio. Are you part of that 53%? Let's find out.
Are you? Are you? Anyway.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. None.
So, today's topic, I'll let you kind of run over it, what it is that we're going to be doing and talking about.
So, one of the things we emphasize a lot on Hyperborean Radio is that we're ethnic faith practitioners. We are focused on ethnic faith, and the core of ethnic faith is the people. And this comes with its own kind of way of looking at the world, and one of those things is when you're looking around at the world, which in our area, like most areas, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of things where you just kind of stand and stare at it, and you're like, you know, there's so many ways this could very easily be done better. And it's like every single time the option was thrown out there, people like picked the wrong option.
Took the worst, the worst of the two choices or three choices.
And
yeah, and it's involves not just our people, but also the environment. So
animals.
Yes.
Because like one of the things that people are doing nowadays is talking about how people need to stay away from animals, but our people have always been cool with animals. There's animals that people consider completely and utterly wild that we used to keep as friends. They label them pets, but they're not domesticated at all, like magpies. We used to keep magpies, and we still kind of do. Every once in a while, someone pops out on the internet, or you hear about somebody who's got a magpie.
And it's a wild bird. It just shows up all the time.
It's a friend. That's what we do. There are domesticated animals, but a lot of animals we just make friends, like the guy that had a bear as his best man.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a thing we do. And the world is being built in such a way that kind of is, I want to say, very anti-human. It almost treats like we need to be with and sort of chained in carrot and stick methodology.
So what we do is we like to play this game where we walk around and with changing as little as possible, making the biggest impact. What would make the biggest impact? It's a mental game that we play, and it's fun. And we're going to start from simple. This is our idea. And yes, there's going to be blocks to actually doing it. Legal policies, even some social blocks.
Yeah,
but we're going to pretend that these blocks aren't in place and what could actually be done. And really, ultimately, those blocks could eventually be shifted. But we're going to start out with the simplest changes and then work all the way up to basically magic wand. So that is the legal disclaimer for this episode is, yes, we are aware that there are legal private policy of like businesses and whatnot and social blocks to what it is that we're talking about. But it is actually physically possible, actually everything, even once we get up to the magic wand stuff, none of what we're talking about is going to require new technology.
It's not going to require science fiction. It's not going to require literal magic wands like bibbity bobbity boo. We don't know fairy godmother stuff here.
Right.
I think what we probably should start with is something really, really simple, which is more trees.
Yes.
That's what everyone goes to. It often gets lumped in with greenwashing, and it can be because if you're just like, well, if we just had more trees, and people start like making, like in that terrible Doctor Strange movie, they got like trees growing on ledges, and it's like this wouldn't work.
Not the way that it's done there.
No.
And I've seen a lot of depictions, and it wouldn't work because the building simply isn't designed for it. But that doesn't mean that the buildings couldn't be designed for it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
With the trees, would actually accomplish many things because we like to go for walks and whatnot. And one of the places that we think trees should be planted is between the road and the walkways. There's multiple bonuses to this. It cuts down on traffic noise. It absorbs some of the CO2.
Well, just the emissions, even if you're not like the CO2 is bad, it's just the car emissions, because everyone can acknowledge that the exhaust fumes are causing health problems.
It creates a physical barrier.
It
wouldn't reduce accidents, but it would reduce accidents of cars
hitting people.
hitting people on the sidewalk and or running into buildings. It would at least slow the vehicles
There's
down.
an increase in privacy. There's an increase in noise.
Noise pollution goes down. There's all kinds of benefits to just planting more trees between the sidewalk and the road.
Floods go down, water quality goes up, soil retention goes up.
The global warming, oh my goodness. Oh, wait, they don't call it global warming anymore. Now they call it climate change.
That way, if things get
it would
hotter
actually
or colder,
encourage a climate change, but what it would do is bring the temperature down.
Yes.
Which trees were being planted like crazy and allowed to plant, and then the climate change alarmists then immediately called to start cutting down trees because it's cooling the planet down too much. They want it to be a perfect 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
What they want is basically to be an air-conditioned... climate controlled. They want the whole planet to be climate controlled.
Right. But it would actually drop temperatures in the summer, but it would also allow for warmer winters, like less wind chill.
Less wind chill, but the snow might still be fine because...
Oh, yeah, there would still be snow. I mean, go check out northern Colorado or extreme the UP in Michigan. Trees all over the place, feet of snow. Well, but it's a different kind of cold versus when you got 80-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh, yeah. The plains are freaking cold because there's nothing to cut the wind chill.
Right.
And here's the thing is because of the water retention, you have more water staying in the environment, which also increases the water that goes into the sky, which creates more weather patterns like that.
Right. Well, and we do have the technology now because another one that I talk about quite frequently is all the power lines everywhere. And a lot of cities, the urban areas, are actually starting to put power lines underground because it's better. It's safer for the lines. You don't have to do quite as much upkeep and maintenance. They're not nearly as dangerous, so on and so forth. But just doing something, and I say simple loosely, as taking the power lines and putting them underground. And that would eliminate a lot of issues, especially if you combine it with more trees. Because, well, where would the birds perch? On the trees that we planted. Yeah, and they could actually nest in there too. And it would actually cut down on power outages as well and random power drains.
And having to cut the trees, because that actually ties into that one, because a lot of the reason that trees get cut down is they start going into power lines.
Yeah.
Like there's trees that were very actually pretty in our area, and they started trimming them for power lines. But part of the issue is they'll cut the branches off of one half, which just to kind of compare that, imagine cutting your arm and your leg off of one side. Because that's
you get a little heavy on the other side.
You get a little wibbly wobbly.
Right.
You're probably falling on the side with the remaining good arm.
Right. Well, because trees, part of how they stay upright is they balance. So you start cutting off big sections of it or a whole bunch of small things on one side, the weight shifts. And yes, I'm aware of issues with roots and things that's underground, but we have developed the piping systems where that is not as much of an issue anymore. Really, the biggest problem tree-wise is willow trees, and that's with water lines.
Well, yeah, all you do with willow trees is you just don't plant them where you have water lines. Because everyone likes willow trees. Yeah. The only thing people don't like about willow trees is they love getting in water pipes.
Well, and if you have too wet of an area, you plant a couple willow trees, they suck the water right up.
Yes.
It's an old country trick. Like, why is this one willow tree right out in the middle of that old farm field? Well, they planted the willow tree to suck up the standing water on the field.
Lots of less mosquitoes.
Yes.
And this is partly what is so important about trying to plan things with people in mind is like people are starting to recognize like vaccines, for instance, they're not quite as effective or
they
useful.
are not what we was told that they are.
Not even close. And on top of that, you can actually track when the vaccines are introduced with, like sewage system improvement. And
mass immigrations.
Which one, so why are they giving the vaccines? And then what actually stopped a lot of these illnesses? Could it be the fact that with better plumbing, we just didn't have as much?
Well, and there still are outbreaks, but the outbreaks tend not to be at the targeted. Okay, for instance, Hyperboreans get smallpox because in America we still have smallpox outbreaks. And then they track it back to this young Hyperborean boy that ended up getting smallpox. But he never actually got sick from it. but all of the non-Hyperboreans around him did get sick. A lot of these things, they didn't really dramatically affect us that we're vaccinated for, and the same thing in other countries
And the ones
with other peoples, because they have their own vaccines.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's like the most notable one that people know that really actually took a toll on us was the Black Plague. But every time it came back, it got less and less bad because the people that survived had a more natural immunity.
And there's
to
outbreaks of that in California all the time. And half the people that end up getting it, that's Hyperborean, don't know that they're getting it. Like if you look, but there was like 50 deaths. Yes, look up who died.
Yeah.
It's a matter of public record, so you can actually look up who died.
Well,
and you'll see that it wasn't us. The last one that I looked up, I think it was last year, one Hyperborean got ill from it, and she was in the hospital for, I think, 3 days just for observation. She was actually already over it by the time that she went there. And yes, unfortunately for the other people, they didn't fare so well.
Yep. And this is the other thing is when we say designing it for people, we are prioritizing and specifically mean our people.
Yeah, the Hyperboreans.
Because like more trees, that would actually improve the mental health of our people.
Yes.
But for Ameriblacks, for instance, they've tried to like
they've tried doing it, and then they go and rip out the trees.
And it's not going to cross the board because like most blended chimera races.
Yeah, that's kind of like it depends on which ones.
Yes, because some of them will actually just straight up start like gardens and stuff, and others not so much. But in general, sort of back to how these things can repair, that's just kind of another disclaimer out there. First, you have the putting the power lines underneath and planting more trees. Another thing that could be a very simple improvement would be more grocery stores, like easier to access. And the solution we came to that would be the easiest is
basically to encourage people to walk.
Yes, because it would encourage people to walk. And simply put, a lot of people don't really want to drive to the grocery store.
Yeah,
it's a pain in the
who
butt.
wants to do
Nobody
that?
likes parking.
Well,
But
and if you could walk there in 10 minutes, which most people in urban environments live like a 10-minute walk from a gas station. If you could walk there in 10 minutes and every day and just get a bag or 2 small bags of groceries and then walk back home, more people would do it.
well, yeah.
And we're not saying get rid of supermarkets, because why?
Well,
It's just offer more competition to the supermarkets.
Well, and some of the supermarkets, because there are supermarkets that do this, they'll buy gas stations and they're like mini stores. So all we're saying is that makes sense. Like,
Yes.
why do gas stations have 4 aisles of junk food and like 1 shelf of actual
right.
food?
And no laws would have to be passed to make this a thing. What you do is you encourage. You encourage by
Tax breaks,
giving
things
them
like
tax
that.
breaks would be the easiest way to do it. Is you just give them a tax break for having X amount of groceries. A percentage of their floor space is actual groceries, like staple food, not like, oh, well, we have 1 basket of bananas and oranges, but because we're a convenience / gas station, they have a tendency to rot. Well, if it's a staple grocery store that happens to have gas, it's all in where you put your emphasis. More gas stations would start doing it because they would start getting more business specifically for doing that. So then why wouldn't they do it? And most gas stations don't make fuck all off from the gas anyways.
Yeah, they make it off of what's in the store. So really, if you can buy, your $100 groceries for like your basic necessities, maybe a little more.
Yeah, they would get a bigger profit out of that, and they would much rather you do that.
Well, and the nice part is you can also get your cigarettes and stuff there, because a lot of people will go there just for cigarettes, and they can go there for your cigarettes and
cigarettes, beer, and lettuce, because you need lettuce at home.
Yeah, just the basic vegetables, because most gas stations are small. But here's the basic fact: is there's like,
well, and even if they didn't carry vegetables, if you had to go to the supermarket for the vegetables, but you could get, I don't know, noodles and canned food and milk and
eggs,
bread, all your real super basic staple foods at the gas or at the new grocery store that happens to have a gas station attached to it. Why wouldn't you do it? Because you have to go there anyways.
Well, and there is actually one gas station. It's not within walking distance, but there is a gas station in our area that actually kind of fits this bill. It's the
Well, I've actually seen a couple gas stations that do it. They're small town gas stations, but they are grocery stores that happen to have gas, and they do pretty all right. And you could argue, well, it's because they're in a rural area. Well, there's grocery stores in a rural area too,
Well, and
but people are choosing to go there.
Well, and another thing that people don't understand is that most cities are actually set up like a bunch of small towns that have all been jammed together.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you segment out, like one good example of this is actually
most cities are effectively a city surrounded by a massive suburb, which the suburbs are divided up into. They're like a bunch of small towns that grew into each other, like you said.
Well, and some of them literally are small towns. They weren't suburbs originally. They became suburbs when they got absorbed by the bigger city. One actually big example of this is New York City, because it was actually several cities originally, and then it all fused together. That's what the boroughs are, I think.
Yeah, that's what the boroughs are. Well, and here's the thing is, one of the major, and it's easy enough to look up. I mean, shit, just look at like Google Earth over a span of years. A major impact is urban sprawl. Part of the problem with urban sprawl is the trees are getting cut down, and then people are having to cut their grass short. And short grass dries out. Everybody knows this. If you've ever seen grass that's cut short in the summertime, it almost always turns brown unless you're just dumping a lot of grass of water on it. So rather than most of the places I've been, 3 inches is as long as you're allowed to have your grass. If it hits 6 inches, you get a warning, and then anything longer than that, if you don't hurry up and cut it, the city's going to come along and cut it and then fine the shit out of you for it. So instead, flip this around and make it to where 3 inches is the shortest that you can have your grass. The soil will actually retain more water, and then our water tables are protected, because currently right now, and I forget what state it is, Hoover Dam, anyways, Lake Mead, it's running dry. It's going down feet a day.
I forget if that's Nevada. I think it's Nevada or Arizona. I forget which.
I believe it feeds Las Vegas.
So that would be probably Nevada.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues. And why is it running dry? Well, it's easy to say, well, it's the urban sprawl and the increased population there. Yes, but it's also how many forests are there? It used to all be grasslands.
Yes,
and the grasslands is more than just grass. It's
some of them were like swamps, basically. Like most of the Southwest was actually like some swamps and some grasslands. That's why so many animals
and
live
there
there.
was scattered trees everywhere. So it wasn't quite a forest, but it also wasn't what people think of as a grassland.
It was scrubland, basically.
Yeah,
scrubland, and that's how animals were able to live, because people are like, how the heck are like pronghorns and bison and elk living in a freaking desert? Like these are, or a bighorn sheep.
Yeah. How did there used to be bison here everywhere? Well, it's because it used to be grasslands or shrublands, whichever one that you want to call it. But there was plant life everywhere, which retained water in the soil, which allowed the aquifers to remain full, which so on. It's a domino effect.
Well, and the simple fact that a lot of people don't know is most desert-adapted species are basically grassland-adapted species that were pushed to the extreme.
So they're merely existing in a desert, much as we exist in urban areas. There's so many basic things that could be done before even getting into really changing things.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the next thing after the grass is like the vegetable gardens, but just to kind of stick on the grass for a sec. Longer grass, and stop encouraging people to literally just grow grass, because grass is the least edible thing,
right,
unless there's something poisonous.
But let it go to seed, because birds, animals, they eat the
raccoons,
the grass.
Opossums.
We can eat grass seeds.
Yes, if you let it get big enough. Wheat is just a very well-developed grass.
Yeah, I've shown you some wild grass around here where the seeds get big enough. It's easy to mistake it for wheat.
Yes, it's not that hard to make another wheat species, really.
Yes.
Or barley or rye or whatever you end up with.
Barley, rye, wheat, all of these, they're just species of grass. They've just been, we've selectively bred them kind of to create these plants, but it all comes from grass.
And that's another thing. There's many different types of grass, but then you also have plantains and nettle and all these other things.
Clover, et cetera, et cetera.
Clover. And here's the thing. Most animals don't eat the grass. They eat the clover. They eat the dandelions.
Right.
You are actually better off having a field of dandelions than a field of short grass.
Yes.
Because and then a lot of animals can live there. Bugs. And here's the thing is people are like...
and so long as people aren't poisoning the dandelions, they're edible to us.
Yes.
Like Oh, I've actually had arguments with people about this, about dandelion greens. And they're like, oh, no, these are special dandelions. I'm like, they are the same dandelions that grow in your yard, except for they haven't been poisoned and they're allowed to grow.
Well, and
That's it. That's the only difference.
Well, and that's the thing is if you just let it grow, you'll actually end up with more things, and you might accidentally end up with something you actually want to keep and grow. That's how a lot of people started growing edible plants in the first place. Like if you accidentally end up with some choke cherries or...
Well, and we're also not saying everybody would have to do this, but people should be allowed to do this.
That's the
If
thing.
somebody wants to keep their grass short, we ask that you keep it at least 3 inches long, and you can mow it 3 inches long every day if you want.
Well, and I
But
think,
somebody else that doesn't want to cut their grass at all shouldn't have to.
well, and if I remember correctly, most lawnmowers can actually be set at a higher size than
Yes,
what
you
they're
have to intentionally drop them down to scalp. And I've seen people actually modify their lawnmowers because they don't like mowing the lawn. They drop it down so they're literally scalping the earth.
which just defeats the entire purpose. At that point,
yeah.
you might as well have concrete.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of concrete,
Yes, most of what's out there is blacktop and cement, which is garbage.
well, the walkways, honestly, I would suggest that we rip up the sidewalks and replace them with walking paths, whether that's dirt, wood chips, or gravel, or some combination
Or
of,
even, like we said, grass.
yeah,
Because actually,
or grass, and then just let the
Let
this
the
is
not-
the walk this is the footpath or bike path, and then people will just walk a path into it.
well, and unless you're using a road bike, you can actually bike on grass because
Yeah.
it's not that hard.
Well, you can't even with a road bike. All you got to do is just
Know
work
what
a
you're
little
doing.
harder.
Well, and this-
but rip up the blacktop and put concrete back down, which is what America used to have, and so far as I know, Europe did too. Concrete everywhere for the roads because you don't have to. One, you don't have all the petroleum runoff. There's a lot of petroleum used in blacktop, as well as other things, and there's runoff that gets into the water table, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you use concrete, you don't have to do this constant maintenance and replacement, and you don't have all the runoff because concrete is really durable.
yes, that's why there's still roads from 2,000 years ago that exist in Europe built by the Romans or Gauls. And this is another thing is it's one of those things where between two choices where they could pay once more for concrete and actually have something that lasts and
For
is,
say 200 years.
Yes.
Even if every 200 years you had to replace it.
it would cost less than constantly doing this. And yes, there are social and, well, there's jobs involved. But constantly doing this is causing not only environmental problems, but there's more crashes, cars wear out faster.
Well, and really there's other things that we could be having the people do, but that gets into a larger picture, which doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about now, but it is a good idea for us to talk about later.
Yes, this will probably be the first in a series of stuff like this.
I mean, we rarely talk about anything in a bubble.
Yes. And that actually brings me to neighborhoods, because we actually talked about this. Like, let's say you have a block neighborhood of 9 houses, 9 houses, 8 houses, whatever. And right now the sidewalks, if you have a sidewalk, are on the edge.
Between the house and the road.
Yes, and usually there's some land that you don't actually own, but you have to take care of, or you'll get fined.
I don't even know what that strip is called, but most people that
it's the
have been forced to mow it know exactly what we're talking about. It belongs to the city, so you can't do anything with it, but you have to maintain it, otherwise you catch a fine.
Yeah, I usually just call it the curb or something.
I think it's called an easement, but I'm not sure.
And effectively, it's nonsensical. If you took the houses and you oriented them slightly differently, and you turned the sidewalk from going all around to actually cutting through the middle, it works well. And how do you get people to agree to that? This will tear out the sidewalk, and then everything, that easement that we've been forcing you to take care of that you never technically owned, it's yours now.
Yeah.
And then everyone gets actually potentially more land.
Yeah, you'd end up with more. Everybody would end up with a few feet more.
And then that sidewalk crosses through the middle. You can even have a commons area in the middle, like a small park or a sitting area.
Give people
garden.
Give people that own the buildings tax breaks for every tree that they have on their property.
Yeah. So you have all this, and then if the front, nobody wants to spend time in their front yards because there's no privacy.
No privacy, and then you have all the traffic and people walking by, so on and so forth.
Whereas if you do it that way, the sidewalk, you
Basically
put it straight
just
through the
flipping
middle.
the idea around.
Yes. So the front yards actually face inwards towards the sidewalk. So now you're facing your neighbors. You're not facing a busy street.
Let's call it a walking path because we don't want sidewalks.
No, we want
Footpaths.
a walking path. And that walking path with the houses facing each other, more trees, everybody's got vegetable gardens that they can grow their own food so they don't actually have to completely rely on things because there's a limit to how big vegetable gardens can get right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of policies in place where you can't actually plant enough, and it seems to be by plants, at least here. It's by the number of food plants. Like you can rip your whole yard up and put decorative plants, but you can only have so many food plants, which is not enough to feed you or your family. Let's do away with that and make it to where you actually can.
Well, there's some areas that have actually, I'm guessing the laws are pretty loose, but they have a permaculture food forest in their backyard.
Yeah.
They have like pawpaw plants.
Either
and
that
fruit
or they're
trees.
breaking the law.
Chickens. Well, if they're breaking the law, I tip my hat to them.
Yes, I would not tell on them.
Well, and that brings me to another thing is along with this reorientation of the neighborhood, so now everybody's facing inward so they can see each other. You still have
Facing each other.
Yeah. So they're actually more likely to interact. You have the walking path, but here's the thing is you're going to get fewer people down that walking path, but it's also straight. Well, then what about the corners? Well, then just build at the edge of one area. The walking path can split into two, and you can have,
Right.
crossing areas.
What we could do is walking paths down the main road. And then for your neighborhoods, because there's sidewalks down every street in most neighborhoods, it's those ones there where we create the shortcuts by walking between the buildings rather than down the streets.
Yes, because that just adds time. It's the same reason walking paths get used in like small cities and towns is you end up making shortcuts.
Right. Well, the cities are smart enough to, let's say, build, but usually all they do is take the footpaths that everybody's already using as shortcuts and then just designate them as shortcuts so that they can get money for maintaining them. But yeah, make the footpaths so that basically you're taking shortcuts everywhere.
Then there's also something called edible landscaping, which is just a buzzword for plant things you can actually eat.
Right.
And that, like around where we live, there's a bunch of mulberry trees.
Mm-hmm.
Those I just grab a bunch of berries when I walk past.
Well, and then more urban areas allow people to, from the city areas, I guess, allow people to, allow people to forage. We have, there's like nature parks in a lot of urban areas, allow people to forage from the nature parks to take the dead wood, the limbs that hit the ground. Allow them to actually take them out because there's a lot of these places that will fine people for doing that. Allow people to just take it. But see, we have to fine people because people will just start taking stuff if we don't allow it. And then what will Bob do that maintains the park? Well, there's so many dead limbs hitting the ground, it is now a fire hazard. Allow people to take out the dead wood.
Well, and there is a balanced way of doing this. And really, I never like making people do something. I usually prefer
Making people do things never works out well.
I usually prefer giving people the option and creating, not creating, but reintroducing normal social cohesion. Because, really, there shouldn't have to be a law in the southern United States that you can't take moss from trees.
Right.
Because there's a bunch of moss that gets used in various folk magic, whatever.
Or art.
Or art. And the rule is you can't take it from the tree directly. It has to get blown off in a storm. So everyone scrambles out after the storm and gets as much moss as they can because it's a very specific moss.
Right. I get rules like this.
I understand it because I don't want
extreme urban areas. However, if the thing is already dead, then where's the issue?
Yeah.
And in Michigan, where we live at, unfortunately, that's actually a thing. You have to get a license to pick up a dead branch,
which is absolutely moronic.
Yeah, we make fun of the English about do you have a license for that butter knife, but here you have a license for that dead branch.
That's asinine. It's completely asinine.
It is.
It's like,
but let's stay on the positive side.
Yes, let's stay on the positive
because this is supposed to be fun and
on the basically because we're thinking of the people first. That's what all these decisions we've talked about lead to. People being able to be more independent, people having better communities, people having better health. there being more environment, because by planting more trees and having areas more oriented towards the people and allowing them more free reign to actually let their spaces go wild or develop them into forests or whatever.
Well, and here's an interesting concept. Cars, because we haven't mentioned cars or roads. We are not talking about taking away anybody's cars, but imagine if everybody just chose to walk because everything was within walking distance, including where you work, because there's no reason that society couldn't be set up that way. If you have less cars, you need less roads.
Yes, precisely. And you can actually make things more walkable, because streets actually used to be for people.
Yeah.
The cars got introduced later, and then they started the whole jaywalking thing.
Yes. Yeah, because they didn't care when it was horses and buggies. If you got run over by a horse and buggy, shame on you and shame on the guy that hit you. But when it came to cars, oh, no. This isn't cool.
Yeah.
Well, and it was in the beginning when jaywalking first became a thing, believe it or not, it was because people would fuck up the cars, not because the cars was fucking up people.
That's hilarious, especially because jay actually is a insult. It's an insult word. Look it up.
It meant stupid, walking stupidly.
Walking stupidly. It supposedly translates to something like dirty hillbilly, or basically a bunch of negative stereotypes. Oh, and another thing that would actually end up happening with all of these things we've talked about up till now is you would have more animals, because there'd be more areas for birds to nest. There'd be more areas for raccoons
making people
to nest.
scared of animals, for one, because currently right now in the news, it's like every third article is
about animals are evil, animals spread disease. It's like we had a neighbor. She was so freaked out. There was a deer near where we were living. She's like, there's a bear over there. Do you know how to get rid of it? And I'm like, I just look at her like, yeah. I'll walk over and I just clap my hands and like, get.
Because it wasn't a bear. It was a deer.
It was a white-tailed deer. It didn't even have antlers. And that's another thing is it's not all city people, but they're so removed from nature they don't realize what an animal is. Like, it was just a big animal, so they thought it was a
big
bear.
brown animal, so it must be a bear because I'm scared. But there's other things too, like elevated roads that could be done. I mean, we already have them. It would depend on a lot of circumstances on what you did with the roads. The roads could be left the way that they are, or they could eventually be phased down, not out. Because one of the issues is America, and sorry, Europeans, much of it, Europe, is actually designed around the vehicle now. The only areas that is designed around walking is the oldest of the neighborhoods, and I've seen it. They're redesigning a lot of these old cities to be car friendly rather than people friendly.
Which is
notice some of your historic buildings are disappearing.
Well, that's like in America. We do have cities that are typically walkable, but they're the really old ones like Philadelphia and stuff like that.
Right, and they're restructuring those to make them not walkable.
Well, they're also, not to get too political, but they're literally trying to tear down monuments, so whatever. Yeah. But that's one of the things is, why are we designing anything without people first? It's like there's this whole thing of, how are people going to adapt to computers? Why do we need to? The computer is a tool for people to use. If it's getting to the point where we have to literally evolve to work with computers better, something is wrong. Well, it's why people like myself, I'll admit, I'm a little bit anti-technology. It's not because I dislike things. Like if someone loses their arm in an accident and you can replace it
with a Star Wars arm, which we're nearly there.
A Star Wars arm, or fuck, if you can regrow one. Frickin' Nuada of the Silver Arm got his arm back.
Yeah.
Let's say we actually invent that and you can actually make a flesh and blood arm.
Right.
I don't want to.
It's not a problem so long as the person comes first, but when profit comes first.
The problem right now is that if someone, say, invented the ability to make someone a new kidney so that they wouldn't have to die from, I don't know.
Efficiency, basically, is the word I was digging for.
Oh, efficiency.
The human arm is not very efficient, so we're going to cut it off and then give you this claw that can spin around 380 degrees at 200 miles an hour. And if you're putting profit or efficiency first, you're being overly pragmatic. There's an issue. The human needs to come first.
The human, and simply put, humans, we're not logical creatures. We're emotional creatures. That's why we need emotional and social connection. And if that was something that I could view as positive, But a lot of people would probably agree with me if I said this kind of technology would lead to something like Repo Man, which is this whole store. It's this whole.
But again, that's a completely different topic.
But
We
mainly,
strayed a little bit.
yes, but mainly the people must come first, whatever you design.
So let's talk about energy consumption for cleaning water, the sewage. Currently, right now, most sewage plants they obviously pull out the solids, but what I'm talking about is the gray water is what it's called, and it's done horizontally instead of vertically. And it honestly, it's a massive waste of energy because they do this by running these huge water pumps.
Well, it's also a complete waste of space because
It's a complete waste of space when we could take that same energy. Let's say the energy pump or the water pump would require the same amount of energy. Let's just consider space. If we was to pump it up, how high is most skyscrapers? 100 stories?
Yeah.
100 stories times 12 feet, that's what, 1,200 feet? Pump it up 1,200 feet and then run it down through. Let's actually use a skyscraper because it's just water. It's gray water that's making it up there. Oh, that'd stink. Well, it can be a contained unit until it gets down so many stories to where the gray water has been filtered using like one of those Roman filtering systems. No, not an aqueduct, a filtering system.
Oh, okay.
Where it goes through gravel, through dirt, through charcoal, through sand, so on and so forth, and it filters out all the particulates. Once it gets down so far, the water's not going to stink anymore, and you keep running that, and then it can be open. But then you keep running it through various natural filtering systems until it hits the bottom, and by the time it hits the bottom, you have fresh water. Fresh water that you could actually go up and scoop up and drink and probably skip putting all the extra chemicals into it.
Well, and that's...
How much space does that save? Especially for a city where you have, say, 100 skyscrapers. 100 skyscrapers where you, with 100 water filtering systems, how much water does that filter?
A lot. Well, and then...
Probably the entire city's worth.
Well, and then if you need to, you could always do something like, I think you said it was in Iceland or something like that, but there's like the basically...
Yeah, that's kind of a cross between a horizontal and a vertical.
But it creates basically natural ponds. And that actually brings me to another thing, which is people keep reinventing stuff we already have.
Yes.
Like natural pond, like a natural pool. It's cleaned by having water plants around the outside. No chlorine needed. I'm like, you invented a pond.
Yes.
You reinvented the pond.
And then you gave it an overflow waterfall to go into your next pond, which does the same thing, which cleans the water more. And so you reinvented nature. Congratulations.
That's one of the things that's really confusing to me is we've kept moving further and further away from nature. Like,
and as we technologically advance, we're finding out nature's
way
smarter.
more advanced than us.
Yes.
Well, like, for instance, psychologically, living in a box is very, very bad for people. Like, there are, like, Antoni Gaudi, who is a Barcelona architect, he used fractal patterns when he designed stuff, and it gets this weird effect of, like, part like you're in an old forest and another part like you're in caverns, which are more natural areas. If you designed the interior even loosely off of that and tried to base it more off of natural shapes, mental health would probably take a massive improvement.
Well, like for most residential areas, people could have their box house if they wanted, but give them a tax break if they make a hobbit home.
Oh, yeah. That's...
There's so many benefits to a house like that. You have heating, cooling. Let me see. There's more green space because now you have green on your roof, whether it's grass, flowers, whatever. On the top, it's more area for the kids to play. You can actually design windows, half-barrel windows is what I believe that they're called, so that you can have all the sunshine that you want. Plus, we have electric lights, and most people end up using electric lights anyways a lot. So we aren't down anything. We're actually, it's a net gain. And apartment buildings, most apartment buildings could be built the same way, except for instead just as one single mound, it could be concentric ring style, or there's other versions, both historical and in the
Lord of the Rings
movie. There's a scene where there's several Hobbit homes built together into a single mound.
Oh, yeah. Everyone forgets that the Bagginses are loaded before he goes and gets gold from the dragon.
Oh, yeah.
He was already loaded. That's why he has such a nice hobbit home.
But why couldn't apartment buildings be set up that way? For your smaller ones that's made of, I think they used to be condos. But all you got to do is just retrain the mind where the door that goes outside is your front door, and the one that's on the inside is no longer your front door. That's your back door.
Which really makes a lot more sense for an apartment building.
And of course, that'd be smaller apartment buildings, not the big ones like in Chicago or New York.
Well, I wasn't even going that far. I was going with more along the lines of just traditional inside of houses, because they always depict the inside of our houses like they were this depressing hellhole.
No.
If you look at the really old house. No, they were fairly cozy if you've ever been in an older house. And then, like, just something simple. Like, say you have a kitchen, and kitchens are usually all straight lines for obvious reasons. What if you just kind of didn't do straight lines? What if you started using more circular lines? Like, this is ridiculous, and it would probably drive any carpenters insane. But, like, let's say that instead of square cabinets, you had cabinets built like a honeycomb. Or like, say you had your entire cabinet built like it was into
actually,
a rock
stuff like
ledge.
that would be easier because I've worked on that end of things. Things that aren't square is easier actually to work with.
Well, okay.
Because the reality is all of your square lines have a tendency not to actually be square. They're very little in a house or an apartment or whatever is actually square, and then the carpenter has to figure out how to take this square thing, put it into a crooked corner, and make it look square.
Well, I mean,
which is a lot of jiggering.
Living things in general, they abhor straight lines. It's like beehives. Beehives aren't traditionally supposed to be square. Those are fairly modern, and it's causing a bunch of health problems for bees. Or
there's beehives where they actually become suicidal, and they think it literally has to do with the shape of the hives.
Well, and here's an interesting thing. I heard this from a friend. He went to some small town in the Southwest, and someone just literally had a beehive, not in their yard, in their kitchen. Like, the bees freaking lived with them.
Yeah.
And they were fine with it. They just had a beehive in their kitchen, and they could get honey whenever they wanted. It was, or like you had when you lived in the UP, you knew somebody whose entire inside of his house
was a beehive. Yeah.
Not like the living room, but like the literal inside of the
like
walls.
in the attic.
In the attic.
Yeah, it was in the attic, and he actually cut sections away so he could pull it out, collect some honey, and then he just puts that section back up. And unfortunately, when he died and he willed his house to his kids, they tried to sell it. Okay, fair enough, I guess. But then they couldn't sell it because of the beehive, so they burnt it down.
Talk about a scorched earth policy.
Yes.
Those poor bees. But
and it was more than one hive. For that many, it had
to be multiples. And here's the thing is...
and you wouldn't know it. Like, I had no idea.
Oh yeah, it's
it's
not noisy or anything. And here's the thing: free honey, free beeswax. They got more than they could possibly use. And this is kind of how our people work. We work fairly well with animals, not against them.
Well, we can.
We've
been trained to work against them, as if nature is the enemy, but nature is not the enemy.
Well, I mean, there's people that, like I brought up the guy that has a bear as a best man, or, there's many different examples. The people that, like us, for instance, we don't have like super best friend animals, but we have squirrels that live near us, sparrows that live near us, shrews, chipmunks.
Right. And why? Because we don't drive them away.
And we're kind of just, we actually talk to them. That's a bit woo-woo, but like I'll say, hello, Mr. Sparrow.
Right. Well, and there's other things too, like, the hellscape of the high-density city. I agree, it's a hellscape. It doesn't need to be that way. We have the technology. And the reason why you can't just plant trees on skyscrapers, for instance, is because the building was not built to support that. It will break the building.
Well, and then you have
However, if you build the buildings with the intention of supporting that weight, you can do it. We might not have 1,000-story buildings, but they can be built to withstand the weight. And design them after trees. Trees do really good at standing upright.
Well, I mean, you could even build, like you brought up, the Hobbit homes. What's to stop a man-made hill? Like a man-made hill that's actually just huge, because there's some really, really big hills. Like people start classifying them as mountains, even though they're just a hill.
Right. Yeah, because if you have your lower buildings that's built more like mounds and your taller buildings that's built like trees, well, these two things work together in supporting each other. But let's go with some historic skyscrapers. Like, well, you're saying that we should tear down the Empire State Building. Nope. What I'm saying is build a building around the Empire State Building, like a hollow tree built around the Empire State Building. We could still use the central, for the waterfall aspect. And we decided to put one in the Empire State Building. There's multiple elevators in there. Take out one set of elevators because they have to work in sets. But I know that there's at least 4 elevators in the Empire State Building. So you take out one set because an elevator, again, it has to have a partner. It's the way that they function. Otherwise, they're not safe. Well, then you have 2 columns right down the middle of the Empire State Building where we could have our water filtration system and build basically a hollow tree around the outside of the Empire State Building. You maintain the historical building. You've prettied it up, and the ionized air from once the water gets down far enough, the water begins to ionize the air. That has a positive emotional impact on humans. But now there's all kinds of different things that can be done without getting rid of a historic building.
Well, and you brought up the ionizing of the ionizing air from water. Mm-hmm. That's why like rivers and waterfalls have a positive psychological effect.
Well, that's why they sell those little waterfalls for your house.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those.
Yeah. The meditation waterfall.
Well, and a lot of times people will redirect rivers, which causes all sorts of problems. Mm-hmm. Why not just use the river? Like, actually use it as a highway. Like, there's whole parts of the Netherlands and Denmark that pretty much it's like a Venice of the North.
Yeah.
If you work with the environment instead of fighting it constantly, you have a lot fewer problems.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's not saying that we can't alter it a little bit. But if it can be worked with in any way, shape, or form, we should try and work with it. It will make everything so much better.
Well, and nature is very resilient because, like, bringing up food again, there's usually a lot of rivers and ponds and stuff. Like, when you were in the UP, there was some fishing vessels that were banned from fishing near the edges, basically. And actually,
you're talking about the fishing freighters that was fishing in the inlets,
which is illegal.
Yeah, that is illegal. But they do it anyways.
But basically, they were stopped for a little bit, and the smelt population grew so much everyone could feed themselves.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is we've actually talked about this before, I think, but our people, and in general, when we actually do things reasonable or in small amounts, we can actually, the environment's pretty resilient. Like lobster fishermen are a really good example. But even if, say, you took away all these big freighters and you replaced them with smaller shipping vessels, you'd be able to get as much, if not more, fish, because a lot of the fish goes to waste waiting in these big freighters to get counted.
Yeah, most of it actually ends up rotting or getting crushed to a pulp to where they can't use it.
But then switching it to smaller ships, the fish are able to do.
Actually, they don't need to catch as many fish to have more fish actually on the market.
Yes, and then there's also going to be local fishmongers, because that's kind of like even though most of North America has local fish, either from the coasts or from the Great Lakes or from rivers, it almost never gets sold really in the local area.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because it's not given to us as an option. That's another simple change, is just let people actually buy local food. It's like it's become a thing that just isn't allowed. It's
there's and yes, we understand there's different rules in different places, but some of these rules are set up in some places where, say you have a 40-acre farm, you cannot sell to your local grocery store. It has to go to a completely different state, be run through processing to then come back.
Yes.
Which is just beyond foolish.
Same with beef producers.
Yes.
It gets really weird, some of these rules.
And it's because it's about money first rather than being about people first. And again, this isn't not attacking capitalism, because I'm a fan of fair and open trade, because there's other issues with other financial, political systems, whatever. Everything has its issues, and no matter how it works out, it's due to people putting money first. And if you think that's not the case, then say communism, because right now I know capitalism is very unpopular, but communism is the thing. In communism, it only takes, say, 3 corrupt people to starve a nation.
Yep.
So there's issues there too.
Well, and here's the thing.
No matter what system people run under, it needs to be people first.
That's the main thing. That is the main thing. And not just with propaganda and pretty words, the people come first. No, actually make the people come first. Because people will talk about the people come first to get into office, and then when they're actually in office, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Or businesses will talk about how important people are and then treat people like garbage.
Yeah, like we're like a family at this place. Now watch this diversity film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know how many people have actually had to sit through a diversity inclusion film, but I had to watch one recently, and I literally started cackling. It was so ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyways, there's a lot of different things that can be done to make things better. Like, let's start phasing out plastic. Everybody's like, all the oil that's being pumped. Here's the thing, 90% of that goes into plastics.
And it
doesn't go into gasoline or diesel fuel like what you've been told. 90% of it or more goes literally for plastics.
Well, and here's the thing is we've got microplastics in our gonads. All of us.
Yeah, because everybody's got gonads. It's an interesting word. It's a fun word. Look it up. It's a great word. But most of the oil that's pumped out of the earth does not go for gasoline. It does not go for fuel. It does not go for heating or cooling, like they tell you. Almost all of it goes into making plastic.
Over 90%, I believe.
Yeah. In some places, yes, well over 90%.
And
so why not replace plastic with natural products? Like, I don't know, if we have a thriving meat industry, there's a lot of bone, and yes, there's companies that grind up the bone and it gets used into bone meal and animal food and fertilizers and whatnot. But there's also a lot of it that goes to waste. We can make bone is pretty. You treat it; it can be shaped. Bone is a wonderful material. We can make the frame for your computer monitor or the frame for your cell phone out of bone or wood or metal.
You also have things like leather or wool or things of that nature that come out of this. And here's the thing is one of the worst things that plastic gets used for is our clothing. Because it's directly affecting, and it's not just the plastic, it's also the cut of the clothing.
Right, because a lot of your synthetic materials have petroleum in them. Most people don't realize plastic comes from oil. From crude oil. A lot of your synthetic materials come from plastic. Crude oil is actually radioactive, which is also something a lot of people don't realize. Like your oil pipelines, they cannot go to a scrapyard. So if somebody gives you miles of oil pipeline, don't take it, because now you're responsible for getting rid of radioactive material.
Yep.
It cannot go to the scrapyard. I don't know what it is that they do with it, but it can't go to the scrapyard. So if we want to get rid of oil, so much of the oil drilling, and really think about how much less there would be if we actually only used oil for fuel, gasoline, diesel fuel, for shipping stuff and people. We didn't pump the extra for plastic. And in most areas in your neighborhoods, you don't actually have to get in the car and drive 5, 10, 20, 50 miles to go to the grocery store. You can literally just go for a short 10-minute walk. It's not even worth getting in your car to go that far. So more people are walking. That's less fuel being used. We don't even need the electric vehicles, which is a whole other thing. They are not nearly as good as people want to pretend that they are.
Oh, no, they're actually much worse.
Yeah.
And actually, here's another thing. It's actually been invented. This isn't some conspiracy theory nut job or whatever thing like people will try to meme it. They have invented multiple times an air pressure powered car.
Yes. I mean, people will bring up the water powered car, and it does exist, but it costs more energy than it's worth. It does function, though. But there actually was an air powered car. And how did it work? You had an air cylinder with your pressurized air in it, and there was an air pump. The guy hooked up the air pump, and there's a lot of technicalities to it, but he hooked up the air pump to the moving parts of the vehicle, so the axles and whatnot, which when you're driving, it fills up one of the air cylinders, and then when that air cylinder is full, the engine kicks off. As soon as the second air tank gets empty, it would kick back on and fill up that one. And there was an experimental version of it, and it had some serious torque. It was burning the tires right off from the car. And I forget which car company it was bought it up, and the entire idea disappeared. It was on the internet like 10 years ago or something like that.
Which is actually funny to me because honestly, if the car company had bought it up and then used it,
oh yeah,
could you imagine? Like they would have destroyed Tesla because who wants to get something where they have to do
how much
lithium?
cleaner can you get than compressed air?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But it's all these little things because profit came first.
It wasn't perfected yet. It wasn't perfected yet, but it was really impressive because this was their downplay for why it wouldn't work. Well, he's using a gutted out minivan shell. So it's several hundred pounds lighter. You're telling me, I don't know, Chevy, Ford, Dodge, pick one, couldn't have figured out a way to make it work for at least passenger vehicles? Sure, maybe not semis.
Yeah,
it might never be functional for semis. But then if all the passenger vehicles were run off from compressed air, how much does that change? Because you don't even have water as a byproduct. It's air in, air out.
Well, and on top of that, oil and gas would drop. It would
literally only need oil for lubrication.
Yes, and then without the plastics, with the air pressure powered passenger cars, all of a sudden oil is no longer that much of an issue. And here's the thing: is because the American dollar has been a petrodollar for so long, that's part of the reason they're freaking out about that.
Yes, but yeah. We're right there towards the end, so I have so much more to say on this, but it would be a completely another podcast. So
multiples, actually.
Multiples, yes. And so many different aspects in and out. I hope that we fired up your guys' imagination, and in some of your areas, you might be able to take advantage of some of these ideas. And others, it's something to work towards. But until then, yeah, I'm just going to say, guys, keep your chin up, stay strong. We're going to make it, and see you guys next week.
And the Lore Keeper is just going to say the entire point of this podcast and ethnic faith and all these things is about the people. If you put something before the people, then it's probably just a messy, if not straight up bad idea. And with that, the Lore Keeper is going to go out.